Good morning, good afternoon, welcome. Glad to have you at the Stanford Humanities Center. I'm Roland Green, I'm the director of the center, and we have been looking forward to doing our first time a kind of experimental event for undergraduates who are studying the humanities, interested in studying the humanities, to talk with recent alumni about their experiences and making the transition from being a student interested in one of the humanities disciplines at Stanford to career paths and life paths. So to get this kind of event going, we started with 6 alumni, three of whom are with us today in person, 3 of whom online, and we're just going to call on them to speak one by one for 5 minutes each, and then we'll have a conversation, them and you, about the things that they've said, advice that they can give, insight they can lend you about their own experiences. This event is for you, and so let's make the most of it. One quick thing, make sure we get your name and your email address. We're going to pass around a sign-up sheet, but before you leave, make sure you get it. And then, of course, we will not spend our whole time in this room talking, but after we've had a bit of a conversation together, we will adjourn outside for sushi and refreshments, and that's all for you too. Okay, so let's get us started, and I'm going to let our speakers introduce themselves one by one, but we're going to start with Sara Auld.
Thank you, Roland. I jotted a few things on my phone really quickly, so we'll see. My name's Sara Auld. I don't feel like that recent a graduate. I graduated in 2001. I was a history major. And my current job is that I'm an assistant professor of medicine and epidemiology at Emory. What that means is that I'm a doctor. I do pulmonary and intensive care ICU medicine. I also do research in global tuberculosis and HIV. And as I was reflecting back, it's been what hasn't necessarily been a straight path to get to this place, which I think will probably be a theme that you'll hear from others today. After finishing Stanford, I spent a year waitressing and working at a call center for Planned Parenthood while I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next and if I was really going to apply to medical school. I did, and then ended up at Columbia in New York for what should have been 4 years, but ended up being 5 because I took a year in the middle to live in Durban, South Africa, and work at a HIV research institute, which was a year that I immensely enjoyed. And even though I was working at a research institute, the lesson I took away was that I didn't like research, but I really enjoyed doing the global health work. After that, I moved on and did my internal medicine residency at Mass General Hospital in Boston. And one of the things about medicine is that there's a relatively prescribed career path that you sort of march through with these various educational steps. Every one of them along the way, I managed to stretch it out and sort of tack on tangents. So while I was doing my internal medicine residency, I found opportunities to do more global health work. I spent time in Malawi and Uganda, and again, really enjoyed the work, but I found myself frustrated by the lack of resources in many of these settings and how hard it was to really practice the standard of care that I was used to in the US. And so after finishing residency, most of my colleagues went on either to actually start their careers as doctors or to do more subspecialty training. I moved to Atlanta to work at the CDC and spent 2 years there doing a program called the Epidemic Intelligence Service, which I think they purposely make sound cool to draw people in, but was a 2-year field epidemiology training program. And I was in their global tuberculosis group at the CDC and got to travel all around the world working with local TB control programs, trying to help them improve their systems, which was harkening back to some of my global health experiences where I felt like there had to be sort of higher level solutions to some of the challenges that these environments were facing. What I learned during that time, 2 of the things I really took forward were that, one, I missed seeing patients. I had worked really hard to become a doctor, and many people who go to the CDC are happy to hang up their stethoscopes and not come back, but I missed that piece of it. And I also realized that my impressions as a medical student of not liking research were being debunked. And that in fact, I really did enjoy the sort of life cycle of research projects, from the conception of the idea to sort of the planning, and then executing a project, analyzing the data from the project, disseminating the findings that you have, and really trying to sort of move through those motions, and having a lot of different projects at a lot of different stages, that allowed me to really spread things out a little bit more. And when one thing would slow down, another thing would pick up. So at the end of those 2 years, I stayed in Atlanta and started a pulmonary and critical care fellowship at Emory, which was another few years, doing clinical training in pulmonary, so lung medicine and ICU. And then at the end of that, had sort of a research component to it. I stayed on as faculty once I finished my fellowship, and that was 16 years from graduation until I was sort of really starting what felt like my first job, even though many of these other things had paid along the way. They were all some iteration of training or fellowship or school. My family has not let me live that down. And then I came on faculty, and I have sort of a hybrid model where I do my clinical care, working with students and trainees. And then I also have grants from the NIH that allow me to do my research. And so I spend actually close to 75% of my time doing research on global tuberculosis and HIV. We continue to do projects in a lot of these settings where I've worked before, where we're trying to sort of advance tuberculosis care, which I was sharing last night. Pre-COVID was the leading global killer among infectious diseases, even though we don't hear very much about it here in the US. Fast forward, after a couple of years on faculty, it was March of 2020, and I happened to be attending in our ICU right when COVID exploded. And it was a bizarre and intense time, and a situation also where I think chance favors the prepared. And so by nature of being in the COVID ICU early on, and also having these research skills, I became really central in Emory's COVID response, designing clinical protocols, also doing a lot of our early research that we were trying to disseminate and push out to help people figure out how to better care for people with COVID. I guess reflecting back, the main things that I think have informed some of these decisions and have helped me along the way, a key one has always been mentors and sponsors. My favorite teacher in high school was my US history teacher. So it's probably because of him that I ended up at the history department and found a nice home there. Got to see Paula Finland, who was my honors advisor last night, and have always really valued those strong personal connections with many mentors and sort of sponsors who are a little bit further along. I think the other thing that I've taken away and really valued from my experience in history was writing. Many physicians probably underestimate the importance of being able to communicate clearly, and it's something that I now do every day. And I think, irrespective of the field you go into, being able to communicate clearly, compile diverse pieces of information, and explain them to an audience who might not be experts is invaluable. And then I think the last piece was really knowing that the world is a flexible place, and I think it's changing all the time. And I'm sure you'll hear this also, that the decision you're making as you leave Stanford of whatever you want to do next is really just a next step. It's not a forever step in any way. And there will always be opportunities to pivot and go in new directions. When I apply for grants now, it's really easy to make it sound like the path I took was a straight line and that I knew exactly where I was heading. Along the way, it didn't feel that way at all, but I knew that I was enjoying the things I was doing, and I was sort of able to check off boxes of things I liked and didn't like, and have now, with the benefit of a couple of decades, been able to put together a career that really allows me to balance these different activities that I enjoy. And I'll stop with that and hand off to the next person.
Hello, everyone. I think I'm next. I'm Mark Dominik, and I work in private equity. I guess it's probably not something that most people know what it is. Um, it's investing. It's buying companies and hoping to make them better and eventually selling them and producing returns for investors. But I didn't always do that. I studied Italian and classics as an undergraduate here at Stanford and the co-turned in French. And I loved the literature and learning about the past. The period that I specialized in was the Middle Ages. Studied abroad in Florence, had a great time. After Stanford, I went to Paris for 2 years and studied there, began work, did a master's and got deeper into research. And what I learned through that, I learned many things as I sort of began that research journey. One of the things I learned about myself is that I like working in teams and groups, and that literary research, as enriching and expanding as it is, was probably not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I also learned many things that you learn when you go on cultural study broads. Learn about different cultures, how different people think, how it motivates people. And so I thought and spent some time, I spent about 6 months thinking while I was in Paris about what I wanted to do next. And I decided that I probably wanted to go into business and work in groups to sort of make a difference to companies and make them better. And I talked to two friends in a Paris metro late one night, one of whom was going to become a banker and the other of whom was going to become a management consultant. And I like to say that a management consultant is the more sort of used car salesman type of the two. And so I decided I'd become a management consultant. So I applied to McKinsey, which is a management consultancy. And I joined in London and I spent about 7 years there, all told. First 2 years, I sort of circulated around a whole variety of industries, working on projects trying to improve the financial performance of some hospitals in the UK, setting up new business units in green energy within oil companies, um, improving the profitability of banks in the Middle East. And, I got the taste that I had always that I wanted to have a very international career. And so I sought out opportunities to work all around the world. One of my clients, while I was there, offered me a job. It was Deutsche Bank. It was leading European bank at the time. It's kind of stumbled a bit since then, but I went and joined Deutsche Bank and I had good mentorship there. And I learned a lot going internal and sort of seeing through some of the proposals and strategies I developed as a management consultant. I spent 3 years there and then I returned to McKinsey. When I returned, I focused very much on the energy and natural resources as sectors of the economy that I wanted to serve. And I sort of circulated around the world. I worked in about 15 different countries, um, helping companies expand, helping them reorganize, companies in sort of the phosphate mining industry, the oil industry, the electrical energy industry. And it was fascinating because you see all these different companies, they have all the different cultural constructs, they're each grappling with a different issue. And when you're working with an ambitious leader, you can really make a difference. And about 7 years ago, one of my clients came to me and asked if I wanted to join him. He was setting up a private equity vehicle that was going to buy an oil company and sort of make it better. I know everyone hates oil, but it is still necessary for the world. Um, so we bought this oil company and it was very inefficient. It had been owned by an electric power company that didn't really understand it. It had allowed it to make all sorts of investments in areas it probably shouldn't have been investing in. And so we sort of streamlined that and focused the company on the core businesses that were profitable, that had a long future ahead of them because they were efficient. Efficiency is also environmentally efficient for the industry. And we merged it with another company, knowing that oil is in long-term decline as an industry, and the long-term winners in an industry in decline are efficient and bigger. We spent 5 years doing that, and it was sort of a fascinating, project. We ended up creating quite a substantial company out of that. And then when COVID hit, our work was done. We finished the merger, the company was freestanding, and I moved on to another firm where I've been working for the past 2 years across a sort of variety of real assets. real estate, hotels, other properties like that. And, I think my lesson from this journey, which sounds kind of random, I guess, but does have some threads, is that it's always important to be open to opportunities that come to you, make a lot of connections, find mentors. When I think about the jobs that I enjoyed the most over the years, it was when I had a boss or mentor that I really looked up to, and we had an interesting project that we were doing that we could feel passionate about. The industry doesn't really matter so much. The the name of the company, the brand, it's never really mattered. It's the people and the project and the ambition that I think really is enriching. And when the people are good and they invest in you, and the ambition of what you're doing is substantial, you can really benefit. Thank you.
Thought I was going to go last because my last name is Wallace, so I'm usually at the end of everything, but I can go now. My name's Lisa. I graduated in 2014 in Symbolic Systems, and it was a very humanities heavy course load of Symbolic Systems. I was actually declared philosophy and math for most of Stanford and took a lot of supplemental literature classes and history classes and intellectual history classes. That was really where my interest and my passion was. And I remember taking a lot of classes that really formed a lot of my interest in the private sector. I now work in the private sector at a bunch of early stage companies in Silicon Valley. So after undergrad, I actually went to a company called Expanse, which was originally a DARPA project started by postdoctoral fellows at Stanford. So as I was doing my thesis in cybersecurity through Center for International Security Studies, which I had gotten interested in because of a history and violence class that Aishwarya Kumar taught in the history department at Stanford, I met just two really interesting postdoctoral fellows that were doing some interesting work on asset management. I became super, super interested in it. And I joined really early at that company, like before there was any revenue. We took that company to about 50 million in revenue and then sold it to Palo Alto Networks for $1 billion. After that, I went to another company that was really early stage called Abnormal Security, which was also cybersecurity doing artificial intelligence work. Super interesting business, also joined really, really early. I realized through my first experience at Expanse that I just loved the early stage of how do you take an idea or identify an opportunity in the world and come up with a solution for it and try to contribute something to an industry. It was just super interesting to me. And I always wanted to work on problems that I thought were going to help the world. And then after those two experiences of early company building, I came across a pretty intractable issue that many of you, especially if you're a female or a minority, are going to hit in your career, unfortunately, which is pay inequity. So how do you take out of business all of the money that you have to allocate toward compensation, allocate it effectively and fairly? It turns out it's a really difficult problem. And it's a problem that you can solve, at least to a certain extent, with software, because you can automate certain aspects of the platform or the problem, measure it, and then actually meaningfully contribute to that. So about 2 years ago, I started a company called Assemble, which does compensation management for businesses. So far, we're about 15 people, growing pretty fast. Did the entire thing in COVID, and I'm still kind of off to the races trying to make that work. But I think what I would say to people that are interested in the humanities is that probably the best training that I had at Stanford wasn't in like math or computer science necessarily for early stage companies. It was actually in the humanities. It was about thinking about a really difficult problem, typically an intractable problem where you're trying to do some kind of inductive thinking, not deductive like a P set, but like inductive. Like here's this really fuzzy problem with a lot of different issues, and how am I going to take a piece of it, put some structure around it, and then spend a meaningful amount of time on that, to solve something. And I think that's hard to get if you are at Stanford and you're doing the quarter system and you're doing P sets all the time, and actually really going deep on subjects and thinking about difficult problems and difficult ethical problems like pay inequity or cybersecurity actually entirely came for me from the humanities.
Now we're going to turn to our virtual speakers, and we're going to take them in this order. Amy, then Maddie, and finally Jeff. I want to give a special thanks to Maddie, who is joining us from the Netherlands, and it is 10 o'clock at night. So thank you especially for being here, Maddie. But go ahead, Amy, take it away.
Hi, everyone. So nice to meet you. Did I just freeze? Oh, no. No, okay, I'm still here. I am class of '06. I was an American Studies major and a French minor. And basically for me, I remember when I decided to go to Stanford, I didn't really know that much about it. I'm Nigerian, and Nigerians are very, very big on labels, titles, fancy schools. So my parents were just like, you're going to Stanford. And when I got there, I kind of got the lay of the land that there were a lot of people doing tech and a lot of people doing medicine and a lot of people who were pre-law. And I lied to my parents and said I was pre-law. But I took no LSATs. And after a while, they called my bluff. They were like, you've taken 0 LSATs. What are you talking about? And I realized along my journey, I kept on trying to figure out what my place was. And I was just taking classes that I liked and trying to be like, is this a CASA major? Is it cultural and social anthropology? Is it English? I didn't really have a flow with what I was studying. And I remember I had a professor who said, study what you love and the rest will figure itself out. Because so often your major doesn't actually correlate to your career at all. And in a weird way, my major did. Because American Studies is the study of culture. It's the study of how we interact with each other. And my focus was mass media and consumer culture, a thing I pulled out of the air, didn't know what I was doing. But now I'm a TV writer. And as a TV writer, especially in comedy, comedy is a conversation about the culture. We make jokes about what's happening now. After I graduated from Stanford, and I also, like I said, I minored in French. And much like Dominik, I spent 2 years in Paris working at a production company that did short films and commercials after I graduated from Stanford. And I also worked in nonprofits, which comes back later in an interesting way. But I was just doing what I loved. And I just loved classes where I got to write papers because I liked writing. I would always ask my professor, my TA, can I write it in the voice of the colonist? Or can I write it in the voice of the person who's doing? I didn't know what creative writing was. And I remember I took my first film class. They started a film major my junior year at Stanford, and I took a class. And I was like, oh, maybe I should change my major because I really like film. And then I had another alum who said, if you really want to make film and TV, don't major in film, major in what you want to make films about, because you can learn film by picking up a camera. You can't learn a voice. So once again, American Studies came into play, because now that I'm a TV writer, I'm writing about America. I'm studying America every day. Everything I do involves research, and I grew my love of research by being at Stanford. I started out in network television writing for NBC, and then I went on to write for primarily HBO. I wrote on season 2 of Silicon Valley. I wrote for all 5 seasons of Insecure. I've written, which was co-created by, or created by a Stanford alum, Issa Rae, who is the year after me, class of '07. And now I started my own production company. It's called Super Special. And for me, it comes from the impetus of lots of people in Hollywood, people think of as superficial. And to me, super special is the opposite of that. I'm genuine as fuck. I don't have another way to be except fully myself. So I have now started the process of bringing in new projects that I can pitch to HBO and take in. And this path has been really interesting, especially because I never knew, I always was writing as a hobby my entire childhood. I always loved writing. I didn't know you could make a career of it. I definitely didn't know you could make money doing it. But I always go back to that person who said, study what you love, do the thing you love, because you will find a way to make that path work out for you. So I really do have humanities to thank, and finding my other fuzzies at Stanford and realizing, oh, it's not weird that I like theater. It's not weird that I like reading plays. It's not weird that I like writing, because I know when I got to Stanford, I felt a little isolated because my interests were so artistic, to be honest. But Stanford is a place that cultivates all of that. So if I could say anything to the undergrads in the room, I think so much. I'm a Virgo too. And as I said, a child of immigrants. So planning is always part of my process. But I remember just deciding, let me just plan to do the things that interest me most and see where the chips fall later. And it's working out so far. So yeah, that's what I have to share.
Great. Thanks, Amy. I think I'm next. And before I jump in, I'll just, the writing piece reminded me of being in law school, and my first writing assignment I had, my writing tutor said to me, lawyers write in a linear fashion. Your writing is like flour. That doesn't work in the law. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, maybe I've made the wrong choice going to law school. But anyway, it wasn't the wrong choice. And I guess this goes to show that, you know, the paths are not linear, as Sarah started out. So Sarah and I were classmates. I'm also class of 01, so probably a less recent grad. I'm currently the China director with the Economist Intelligence Corporate Network. My very fancy background is hiding the drying laundry in the temporary apartment behind me because I'm a refugee from Shanghai at the moment. We fled a very extreme lockdown and are in Amsterdam. So what that means, actually, you're probably all familiar with The Economist, the newspaper, but The Economist Group is kind of an umbrella, and the other piece of the group is the Economist Intelligence, and that's where I sit. So we're kind of the research and analytical arm. And the piece of the business that I run is for Greater China, Beijing, Hong Kong, Shanghai, for corporate leaders in the region, kind of helping them navigate and make sense of what's happening in those markets, leveraging the collective intelligence of the group. You know, and I guess one of the things that's been most satisfying to me is like I finally feel, you know, probably 2 decades after graduating, that I'm hitting my stride really professionally, but I really have found the right balance, the right mixture of using my skill sets, but it's been a circuitous path. And I guess the piece of any advice that I would give would be more, you know, it's too cliche to sort of say doubt everything and find your own life, but be willing to challenge your own assumptions, take risks. You know, probably a decade after we graduated, another castmate of ours was working with an executive coach because she had a very high-flying career and was helping to think about next steps. And this coach, she shared all of the insights with us because that's what, you know, your Stanford alum friends do, was saying there are different drivers in your career. So some people, of course, it's salary, money. Some people, it's, you know, industry or position or title. Some people, it's people, culture. And as long as you're kind of clear about like what really matters to you, that will help. And I think for me, probably not unlike, you know, all the speakers before me, it was always kind of finding the next adventure. Since graduating from Stanford, I think I've lived in like 8 different countries. Some of that is just kind of following various paths. I went to law school. I worked in the nonprofit, public and private sector, had a very roundabout way of ending up where I am now, including having my own consulting business for over a decade, which is something I never intended to do, but I ended up doing in part because at that point I was following my then husband and needed to kind of shape a career for myself alongside him when we were living in Italy. And so, you know, I think being open to opportunity as it comes along. And the final piece is sometimes getting out of your own way. Even this position with The Economist, which has turned out to be a wonderful experience for me and enriching in so many ways, I really doubted myself in the beginning because I'm not an economist. I have a degree in international relations, and I also was in the ethics and society program. So, you know, ethics, Lisa, is also something that's been really important in my career and kind of that humanities grounding and thinking about problems. So when I was applying for the position, I thought, oh, they'll never want me because I'm not a trained economist. Yes, I did IR, but even within IR, my focus wasn't on economics. It was more on the cultural aspects of international relations. And then one of the things that was surprising after I started is they said, we value the fact that you view things not with the Economist PhD view. In fact, you know, when The Economist was founded in 1843, everyone was a white British male who went to Oxford, to the same college at Oxford, and everyone thought in the same way, right? And that we intentionally don't want that anymore. We want diverse people with diverse ways of thinking. And yes, that's diverse in terms of background, but it's also diverse in terms of educational background. There's a value in kind of a humanities grounded perspective in the conversations that we have, not only in the writing, of course, in the newspaper, which you probably are more familiar with than the piece of the business that I run, but even in engaging with the business leaders and putting together the programming and giving the briefings that I give, having that perspective has really helped me to, you know, take on the analysis, I think, in a more expansive way than kind of just the strict narrow, because yes, the data and the numbers and the market trends can tell you so much, but there's also so much more to markets than just numbers, right? I think we all know that. And so I'm really grateful to the way in which kind of a humanities education has allowed me to draw on that in a way when, you know, I feel like what's happening in China at the moment has huge implications, not just, of course, for China, but also for the world. And so to be able to work with business leaders at, you know, the biggest multinational companies thinking about how to make sense of what's happening in China and draw on the resources of the Economist Group, and doing so has been hugely rewarding. But yeah, I'll leave it there. And it's okay if you write like flower. That's also the kind of the final takeaway. There's a place for the flowers in the world.
Well, Maddie, like yourself, I'm a lawyer, but I don't know that my writing would ever be described in anything close to that kind of a complimentary fashion. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Lee. I'm the CEO of DIBS, which is a new direct-to-consumer makeup company designed to make makeup accessible and unintimidating to women and men, and frankly, people across the United States. But I got here pretty much from a similar starting point as Maddie did. I came in at the same time as Amy. We were classmates in the International Relations program, where my studies focused on actually how you elect women to presidencies around the world. And that was a very kind of unique esoteric interest of mine, but it paved the way for me to go on to law school. And I practiced corporate law for 6 years, where I worked on the development of various tactics against takeovers, hostile takeovers, including the poison pill, which is a corporate defense that we actually saw Twitter just try to use against Elon Musk. After that, I decided that I had, to really go and pursue a separate kind of parallel passion of mine, which was beauty. So I wanted to have the business background to do that. And I went to take 2 years out of my life and frankly, kind of take a break from the Wall Street lifestyle. And I came back to Stanford for my MBA. Coming out of Stanford, I launched my own direct-to-consumer venture, but very quickly fell into another job, which was chief operating officer to Alex Rodriguez, the legendary Yankees player, and his then other half, Jennifer Lopez. And I spent 3.5 years managing their brands and their own careers, as well as their new beauty businesses, very much immersed in this Hollywood world that Amy spoke of. And that gave me the background to then go out and launch my own business. So as Maddie and others have alluded to before, the path to get here was very circuitous. There's a couple of things though that have, I think, characterized everything that I've done, and probably a lot of what the people who spoke before me have done, which is passion and purpose. And I think that it has always been a kind of fool's errand to try to balance all of those different factors that even Maddie kind of outlined for you, in terms of what you might think of are your satisfying forces in life, whether that is the title, the pay, the career, or what you're doing day in, day out. And those are personal decisions. But I have never regretted at all choosing one career option over another, making the change and taking the jump when I did, because each path, even though they might not have borne any real obvious relationship to what came before, and even though they forced me frequently to reboot to zero and then build myself back up, often in worlds that didn't care about my fancy degrees from Stanford, although my parents did, classic immigrant story as well. In each case, having to learn an industry from ground up or competency was much more exciting for me because I had passion and I had purpose doing it. What I do today is very unlike what a lot of my peers in the IR program are doing. They're solving nuclear crises, they're mediating Ukraine and Russia, and I'm worrying about the color of bronzer and blush that I'm developing, or whether or not a celebrity has misspoken on NBC News. But I feel a great deal of purpose behind it because what I do, I know impacts others. It might not be at the same scale or the same kind of scale, but it's something that resonates with me. We make the world more beautiful, and we make people feel more confident about themselves. And I get as much validation from that, from hearing one satisfied customer, as I did a lot of these fancier titles, jobs, and positions. And I think that's just going to take me to the essay I wrote to get back into Stanford, which was, and I knew I was a very kind of questionable candidate because I was very late in my career and the business, had gone down this path, and business school apparently didn't really like people like myself who were coming in. And, I said in my application, and the Dean of Admissions quoted it back to me when he met me in person, which is that Stanford, during my undergrad years, when I was sitting in the chairs that you're sitting now, 20 years ago, was a sandbox. It was a place where I could make mistakes and feel free to constantly make mistakes. But it was also a place, when you think about when you're a kid and you're making those sandcastles, so you can dream bigger and better dreams. And I really encourage that for all of you right now who are sitting there. You'll never have another time in your life when your mind is so open, when the possibilities are endless. And even if you have those immigrant parents like Amy and I and many others did, who are pushing you into a preordained path, study what you want to study, what challenges you, what gives you passion and purpose, because this is such a precious time in your life. And obviously it's marked so many of our lives that we're all here with you on a Saturday. And those of us coming in remotely don't even have the sushi. So, you know.
All right, let's spend a few minutes having a conversation. Let me invite Lisa to sit up front, and the virtual people will stay online with us for a bit longer. And now, your chance to ask people in this group anything you want.
You just need to turn on your mic with the left-hand button.
Questions?
Thank you. Should I go with they can see me also, or they can just hear me? Okay. Hi, my name's Emma Thane. So my first question, some of you already answered, but I was wondering how you guys chose what you were going to study while you were in undergrad. It sounds like a lot of you chose what you're interested in, which I think is very beautiful. In my own particular situation, I want to do that, but I feel so money is kind of an issue for me. So I'm a little worried about how I choose my plan so that after school, I'm not in a really bad situation with a lot of debt. So I guess that makes me more inclined to like try to make some kind of structured path instead of following like what I really want to do at the moment, which is the way that I want to be structuring my undergrad, but I guess I'm a little scared to do that. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
I'm happy to kick off. I'll say something crass to begin with. Like, you can study whatever you want and make a lot of money. I wouldn't worry about that. Like, money will come. I think what's important and what the humanities can teach you is to think critically, to analyze things in depth and detail, and to then present the findings of your work in a compelling manner. You could also learn that through math or physics or anything else. Any discipline done to a high enough standard where you're really challenging and pushing yourself to learn, and you're really motivated to take away more than just sort of the basic learnings from it, will prepare you for an interesting career. And I think in particular in careers where there may be an overrepresentation of engineers, or computer scientists, or mathematicians, having someone with a slightly different perspective, but a very educated perspective, can be useful. That said, if you do a degree in the humanities, you're probably not going to get a job coding unless you also become a very good coder. There are a lot of ways to make money that don't involve coding as well. And so there's a world out there of business opportunities that will allow you to pay down your student loans. And also, for those of you who worry about student debt, there are also a world of opportunities where loans can be forgiven for doing sort of, humanitarian work. That's not a path I've chosen myself. I've been in business, but I wouldn't sort of sit up at night worrying that if you get a degree in French or in classics or in, anthropology or whatever, you'll somehow be precluded from a successful career.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind tackling this as well and just saying that it's okay to live in the and. It doesn't have to be this or this. It can be both. That's the magic of a minor. Like I minored in French. What a useless degree. But guess what? After I'd studied abroad, my first job back in LA was working for E-Networks because their #1 channel abroad was the French channel. So it just do the thing you love and do the thing that might be considered more practical. Eventually one will out. And also with time, even if you choose the practical path, the thing that feels like it makes sense on paper, after graduation, if that other thing is itching, eventually it will come back to you. Creativity doesn't have a timeline the way that dancing does. Like you probably can't pivot to being a prima ballerina at age 45, but you can always pivot to being a writer, an artist, a photographer. All of the greats found their greatness later in life. So if there's something you truly love, live in the and. Do the thing that you're scared to let go because of the money, of the promise of money, which by the way, I completely agree with basically what everyone has said. If you follow your passion and purpose, the money will follow. But also do the thing you love because it will win out if it's supposed to be the thing for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of you are in this incredibly enviable position where you're going to come out incredibly well educated, very thoughtful, and any number of careers and professions and employers would be delighted to have you. It's of course terrifying when you don't have that certainty, but it will be okay. And I think having some faith and having people who have made it to the other side, I was going to go to medical school the whole time, but knew that I was going to have the rest of my life to study medicine. And so wanted to do something that I really enjoyed, and later found out that it was also giving me all these really practical skills that I can bring into my medical practice.
Oh yeah, I might just add one thing on that, and it's a little bit of what Amy said, which is you can do both at once. So I remember when I started working at a law firm after law school, because in particular in the law, it's quite stark. You can graduate and you can make an obscene amount of money, or you can go into public interest law. And I knew I kind of wanted to do human rights, and you make nothing. And so I decided I was going to go to the corporate world and make money, take a big bite out of my loans. And I was extremely disciplined. Like every bonus, as soon as it hit my bank account, I was like, Freddie Mae, Fannie Mac, it's all you, girl. Like you take it, it's not mine. Like, pay it back, right? And so I did it for a while and was very disciplined about, kind of the both ands. Like I know what I really want to do. This is why I was interested in the law. I love the education. And then I remember when I pivoted to doing human rights work, I was still living in New York, and my salary was 1/4. Like it was 1/4 of what it had been the month prior. And I had this moment of like, oh my goodness, how am I going to make this work? But then you realize it did take me a lot longer to pay off my loans, of course, once I made that pivot, but it did open all these other interesting professional doors. And so it's kind of at each point along the way, knowing where you are in the both and continuum, like you can kind of hold it. And I think the point that you made, Amy, about like the greatness comes later, or, there's always a moment, not if you're a professional dancer, but for kind of the rest of us, there's always a moment when you can pivot. And so to kind of be just clear in yourself what your priorities are. And it's okay. Like we're not all going to be in a place where, you can immediately graduate and follow your bliss without concerns about practical realities, because a lot of us have them. And so you can address the practical realities and make space for your bliss at the same time.
Thank you.
I had a thought, so a strange thought I had was the best financial decision I ever made in the first 35 years of my life was going to Paris on a Fulbright. It was the most profitable thing I ever did. I never would have got my job at McKinsey if I didn't do that and met the person who introduced me to that. And then 4 years later, when he set up his own company, I was his first outside investor. And the company did really well. And so life is strange. Things that sound like a terrible financial decision, you should go get a job, don't go to Paris. Actually, in the long term, that would have been the wrong decision.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicholas. I am a senior undergraduate, and over the course of my time here at Stanford, I dabbled in many areas. I finished a major in mathematical and computational science. I have a minor in classics. Now I'm studying a lot of American history, some religious studies and such. And I'm in this place where I have so much that I really am interested to learn. And I also find myself in the place where I want it to translate into something tangible. And I really resonated with everything each of you has said about following something that interests you and then how the next will come. But what might you all offer from your experiences about just making sure that you're not losing a degree of direction, even if the things that you are doing give you a sense of purpose and a sense of interest, I suppose. So yeah.
I mean, I can start speaking to that. I think there's a lot of like horrible advice in tech about how to think about where your next career is and stuff like this. And I've also taken a lot more risks, I think, than the average person. Like I didn't go to a McKinsey or a Google or anything immediately after undergrad, but I think I let kind of two things really drive my career. The first was like truly being intellectually curious and going deep on something. And that started at Stanford, frankly, like in the humanities and social sciences, where I was really interested in cybersecurity and went really deep on it, you know, and then that kind of carried through in the rest of my career. Actually, my first internship in tech was at Palantir. And the reason that I got that internship is because I got in like a minor fight about Jürgen Habermas with Alex Karp, who's the CEO. And I think as I was listening to everybody else talk, I think that a lot of what people discount about finding opportunities is that being intellectually curious and interested in things pays off, and it helps you seek opportunities, but also be sort of interesting to other people to make a bet on. And then the second thing that's also really helped me is independently, critically being convicted about something, meaning like, you know, do I think that going and making this decision and spending time on it is a good idea? And I think that's sort of relying on critical thinking skills. And both of those combined with chance, you know, just how the world is changing and opportunities, you know, eventually is directionally correct, you know, gives you a sense of direction in your career. And it's really difficult to predict things in advance or predict how things are going to go. But I think if you rely on, you know, an independent and personal sense of curiosity and intellectual rigor, and this sort of willingness to come up with your own mental model for something and have conviction about it, you know, in real time, you're going to have direction to your career.
And I think the point about skills is a really important one here. Even though I put maybe the phrase passion and purpose into the conversation earlier, I actually believe that just pursuing your passions alone is a terrible advice because, you know, if I had done that, I would be a horrible Egyptologist and like totally broke and unable to like finance any of the other endeavors I've had. And, you know, everybody is wired differently, right? Some of you will have fixed passions that you will commit yourself to for the rest of your lives. You sound a bit like myself, where you might have a couple dozen that range from, you know, the mildly curious, like Cat's Eye for me and Magic the Gathering cards, to, you know, lifelong passions, which are like what makes people vote for women in other countries versus ours. And I think when you look at what's going to separate okay, like these are hobbies or, you know, moderate interests I can put on the back burner, or if this is a burning thing I want to do, I think the skill set is really key, because a lot of your professional advancement and your direction will come from the skills that you offer to each employer that you're with, or even yourself if you're employing yourself. And at the end of the day, I always say to people, you know, I worked one of the most glamorous jobs imaginable for Jennifer Lopez, where I could walk red carpets with her and do you know, basically anything that anyone who had ever looked into this world wanted to do. But what mattered to me was the skill that I was doing every day. I would have done the same thing for someone who no one had ever heard of or had ever built a brand around. And in fact, I did it for her other half because I'd never heard of baseball. And apparently I was working for one of the greatest players in that sport, and I didn't even know what direction they ran on the field. But the fact is, day in, day out, the skills I was developing were critical. I was building the brand. I was thinking critically through their challenges on a day-to-day basis. I was always trying to re-examine it from a quantitative perspective as well as from a broader holistic perspective, things like that. So, you know, if you can focus in on what skills are going to make you 1,000% better, that I think can also provide the direction, more so sometimes on the surface passion.
hand over here.
Quick follow-up.
Oh, quick follow-up.
This one is, so thank you for those responses. I really appreciate the idea of skills and also of following intellectual curiosity. I have a very small and sort of joking question. Amy, do you know Alex Hodge?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, no, it's just a random question. All right, thank you.
He's fantastic. He's fantastic. AKA Asian Bang.
Hi, my name's Laura. I'm about to graduate in June with a double major in English and Film Studies. And I want to go into the entertainment industry and be a screenwriter. So right now I'm at this point in my life where like there's a lot of uncertainty, especially in entertainment. Like most jobs are like, oh yeah, like all interviews I've had is like, can you hop on board tomorrow? And I'm like, you know, I'm an international student, so most entry-level positions don't really accept internationals because it's just like an extra cost in them. So I guess I was wondering if at some point in your careers you have like encountered like insecurity or like just not uncertainty mostly, I guess, about the future and like how you deal with that. And kind of like pursue your passion at the same time as like, you know, coming up with like a game plan and everything.
Yeah, for sure. Insecurity every single day. It never goes away. Sorry. It never goes away. Imposter syndrome is real. And having moments of insecurity is real. And to be honest, when I was living in France, I was first there working for a nonprofit, and then I started working for a production company that did short films and commercials. And I kept on trying to move up. I was an intern, and I couldn't get a job because I was an international person there. And I would always come between me and a French person, and they would choose the French person. And I started realizing, oh, it doesn't make sense. Like the way I'm pushing here isn't quite making sense. And that's when I contacted friends in New York and LA and was like, what should I do next? And a friend in LA had an apartment, was like, come move in with me. And I was like, okay. So, but I will say, not to discourage you in any way, I think based on what you have said, you have studied, I think the first advice I tell anyone who majors in film or TV or writing is graduate from school and go do something else. Go do something else for a summer, for a year, for 2 years. Go do something else. Because once you're in this industry, you're in it. You don't get to leave and stay in it. And doing that something else will give you stories to tell. You want to be a writer, go collect your stories. Go to a place that will hire someone who's international and won't think twice about it, and go collect some stories. There's no such thing as being late to this industry. It doesn't exist. Go and like do a Fulbright. Go intern at, a veterinary clinic. Go work at an ice cream shop. Go do a research institute. Like anything that gives you more stories, and then come back. It will be here waiting for you. And during that time, take some writing classes, because even though Stanford teaches a lot about writing, I always believe in the 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours. Quantity leads to quality, that's the same. And get those hours in, and then this will be here. And also, in the event that you go and do something else and you are like, okay, I feel equipped to sell my soul to Hollywood, the agencies like UTA, WME, CAA, they hire international people. So lots of people, like even my executive, she's from Singapore, and her first job was at UTA because they did sponsor her. So she worked there for like 3 years, and then eventually married an American and got her citizenship, and that works for me. But so you can get in that way. But I really encourage you, with that eagerness, that eager love you have for this, it's amazing to have it. And therefore cultivate that voice, so that your first script coming out here isn't about just having graduated, having roommates, parents not believing in you, the things that everybody writes about their first time. Go get some other stories and then come back, and it'll be here for you. I hope that isn't, I can't see you, so I hope it's encouraging to hear that, not discouraging. I hope it feels like you're supported. That is my intent.
You're getting a thumbs up, Amy.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Thumbs up.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. And obviously completely unrelated to my field, but having done a lot of side paths, I think as long as you're enjoying those steps along the way, you'll get somewhere. And, you shouldn't stay in a position that's miserable because you think it's going to lead to something positive down the road. that's a wake-up call. But if you're enjoying those steps along the way, you will be gaining those skills, gaining those stories, and it will continue some sort of movement, even if you don't know exactly where that's going to take you.
Maybe I'll add to that, that one of the women who was most kind of inspiring to me and a mentor to me, and as a young woman in my early 20s, she had kind of this amazing career, amazing family. She founded an amazing nonprofit that she won awards for. And she just, it was like the proverbial, she had it all. And I hate that sentence. Now I reject that whole entire concept, but she had it all. And she came and spoke to my book club, and we were all like, literally like, how did you do it? How, like we all just were like desperate to know the secret. And she said, I didn't have it all at once. It never happened all at once. So from where you're sitting, you think that, but that's just because you're looking at me now when I'm nearly 60. And it's something that I've returned to again and again when I'm making decisions in my career or in any part of your life. It doesn't happen all at once. And I think that's really important for those of you kind of about to graduate or kind of coming, working through your Stanford careers, that you have a long time and it's not going to happen all at once. And there are going to be those side paths and circuitous routes. And I love the advice, Amy, to go get your stories, because there are a lot of stories out there for you.
And I'll say one other tiny thing is that when you do come back, every interview I ever had trying to get assistant jobs, they never asked about film school. They never talked about Stanford. They talked about the year I was a t-shirt designer. They talked about the year that I lived in France, because everyone's resume is the same. Film school, wrote a screenplay, and then I had these other things that were weird. And that's what everyone wanted to talk about. So just wanted to get that too. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I guess I'd want to share something as well. There's sometimes this perception that in the world of business and finance, everyone should be kind of like a robot. They've cranked the numbers through the spreadsheet. It says 22, so we're going to buy it for 22. Actually, no one wants to talk to someone who's like that. Why would you want to do business with someone who's like that? They're terrible people. Like, they're boring. They're tedious. So yeah, I think, Amy's point about collecting some stories is valid in all sorts of fields. You need to be able to entertain someone over a lunch, have a bit of a backstory, be a human being. And so taking a circuitous path actually makes you a better human being to engage with people in any field. I'm sure with your patients, it makes you a better person to engage with them, that you actually have a life and you've had some life experiences, and you don't just have, you weren't just working 90 hours a week in, residency straight through.
Hi. First, thank you all so much for spending your time sharing experiences. And then I have two questions. So one, in terms of like professionally, how do you find collaborators that are, I guess, like complementary to your projects? And then like, what are some tips in terms of finding like the right group of people? And then second, like I'm a freshman, so I'm wondering like, well, what advice would you give to your freshman self while you're at Stanford, and like what kind of things that you wish you could have done differently now looking back? Thank you.
I could start. Mike, come on. So I'd start by saying cast the net wide. So, and again, you don't get it all at once, but over life, you accumulate people. Lots of people with different competencies, different skills, different interests that all could add something unique to your life, and you hopefully add something unique to their life as well. And many times when you develop a relationship, you have no idea whether it could eventually become a useful relationship in some way, shape, or form or not. But if you have a wide network of friends who you respect, mentors, people you're mentoring yourself, a lot of interesting opportunities come your way. And then you need to decide which ones you're actually really excited about and want to pursue. And then, others you may not. So the first job I got in private equity was with a senior business leader who I respected a great deal. And I had worked with him sporadically as a management consultant, and he'd been on the board of one of my previous employers. We just kept in touch for years. And 7 years later, he asked me to come work for him. I wasn't interviewing for a job. We just kept in touch. I'm here today because Roland asked me to join this advisory group, and we're all here today because we kind of kept in touch with some professors. I think keeping in touch with people who are interesting and have interesting projects, oftentimes a project will then come your way.
On the topic of casting a wide net, I'd also say it's helpful to think about the distinction between mentors and sponsors. I think mentors are pretty critical for you right now, especially because you're starting out as a freshman. And there are people who you will have a natural affinity with, someone that you can trust. It might be, junior, seniors, or they might be professors that you like actually enjoy hanging out with. They're both your friends, and they're people that can build you up, kind of help you course correct and be a sounding board. But sponsors are different. Sponsors are the people that will advance you, and they often have no natural relationship to you. I always give the example, now I can quote baseball because apparently I know something about it, but Derek Jeter named Kim Ng the first female manager of a major league baseball team several years ago. And the two of them had not talked in maybe 24 years, but he was very much a sponsor in every sense of the word. They weren't best friends, they didn't go out to drinks, but he put his capital, his personal credibility, everything on the line for her. And so I think that as you advance through your career, keeping an eye out for people that can be your sponsor and going out and getting them is key. And to do that, you generally have to build up a reputation for yourself, because those aren't necessarily the people that you may visually or, from a background perspective or personality perspective, share anything with. A lot of the sponsors that I had at Stanford would probably hate spending more than half an hour with me over lunch, but they were willing to advance me in many different ways because they saw something in me. And going to your other question about being a freshman, well, Amy and I were freshmen together, and I'd say I would try to be more like her. I mean, granted, she also just wrote a show called Insecure, but I think one of the things that really struck me was that Amy, when she was a freshman and throughout our 4 years, was unabashedly who she is, I by contrast spent most of my time trying to conform. I was obsessed with the Greek system. I really wanted to fit in what I thought was a narrow way of understanding it. And I don't ever want you to underestimate the social pressure that might detract from your academic or all the other experiences that you might have, because trust me, I came back to Stanford as in my late 20s, 30s, and I felt the same thing again, the second time around. So it's not just an advice to my freshman self, it's an advice to my MBA oneself 20 years later, which is just to not conform. And I think about the people who are exceptional from the class of 06 for good and bad reasons. And they were all people that really marched to the tune of their own drum, the beat of their own drum. And I encourage that for all of you.
Jeff, you've touched my heart. Thank you. But also, Jeff was one of my favorite people at Stanford. And when you talk about staying in touch, I love the adage network across. That idea of let me call, the head of Deutsche Bank. You might not be able to today, but who's next to you that you can just stay in touch with, and you don't know if they're going to be an asset in the future. I don't think of it that way. It's are they my friend? Do I like to vibe with them? Do I feel comfortable sharing my goals with them? You never know where those opportunities will take you in the future. And it's such a pleasure even coming back to this program and getting to be on this committee with Jeff, who's been a friend since freshman year of college. And you're who knew that we were going to be literally, that's crazy. And so you just don't know. And so as a freshman, I feel my advice would be to meet people and find who you vibe with, go off vibes, find the people that you really click with, and don't have an end game. Because sometimes the networking, that word networking, I think kind of have a little bit of a stink on it. But it's really just who do I have a rapport with? Who do I feel comfortable sharing space with? And maybe they'll be a collaborator one day. Maybe they'll be a mentor one day. Maybe they'll advocate for me. I don't know. But when you're your genuine self, you eventually will get to genuine relationships with other people.
Yeah, maybe something I would add is, I think at Stanford undergrad, you can get really overwhelmed by like wanting to preserve optionality or like totally offset all risk, or like want to look ahead of yourself because everybody in your class looks really impressive or is collecting awards or constantly doing that. And I think the truth is it's very hard to like have a meaningful experience, learning experience or otherwise, where you're doing like 15 things at once or like 15 clubs at once and all these classes and you're the president of everything and you're collecting titles. And I actually don't think that's the most meaningful way to go through Stanford. And I would just kind of ignore that. I think some really good advice actually that I got from like a senior co-term when I was a freshman was not just to collect mentors and also relationships, because these will help you, you know, over time, truly have meaningful relationships that are based on something, but also to like not be afraid to go deep in something. This doesn't actually close doors. It actually gives you this great, you know, foundation for how do I think through a problem? How do I stick with something? How do I really interrogate an idea and come up with what I think about it? And that actually takes time and it takes focus. And you don't have time and focus if you're doing, you know, 20 things and trying to look like the president of everything. It's just like the kind of the wrong way to do things. And we're all in this room because we all have been touched or care about the humanities in some way. And I think it's okay to lean into that. It's actually a good thing. And everybody that has been talking has talked about how like something that they were super interested in, to use Amy's word, like a story, significantly helped them in their career. And I think that that's because people were, you know, all of these very impressive people that are speaking followed something that they really cared about, probably not for how it looked or, you know, what they were going to be able to put on their resume, but from what they were learning from that. And when I look back to the most formative experiences of Stanford for me, just intellectually, but also what down the line in ways I couldn't have anticipated helped me advance my career, it was truly from being deeply interested in something and pursuing it for a meaningful period of time.
Hello, Emma again. So I am also a freshman, and a lot of you have talked about finding mentors, and I was wondering if you have advice on how do you go about that? Yeah.
So I'm actually in town for a medical conference that's starting in San Francisco on Sunday morning, and an MD PhD student I work with is coming, and I've encouraged her to leave Emory for the next stage of her training, and gave her a pep talk last week where I said, all of these people that you want to talk to actually really want to hear from you. There is nothing they like more than working with students and trainees. It's the most exciting, most interesting part of their job. And trying to find someone who really is interested in their field and wants to sort of engage with them. And so I think getting past that sort of fear and discomfort and imposter syndrome and trying to find someone where you get to foster a more meaningful relationship, everyone will want to hear from you and be excited. So it's showing up at the office hours, finding those smaller seminar courses, and, you know, looking for opportunities to do a more in-depth project with them. People are excited to do that rather than just sort of have a lecture hall of 200 students where no one really interacts with them on a, you know, person-to-person level.
I think there needs to be an element of genuineness to it. So I wouldn't sort of say, okay, I'm in 4 courses this quarter, I'm going to go get 4 mentors out of that. But let's say you have one class that you really are interested in the material in a fundamental way, or you somehow click with the professor or the TA or the postdoc or whoever it is. Mentors can also be peers over time because, you know, it may not yield any sort of opportunity tomorrow, but 20 years from now it could. And so I think finding people you click with, whether it's on the content they're working with, or you have some sort of, you feel personally that you like them, and then spending time with them. So if it's a professor and you really are passionate about the material that the professor is presenting, go to office hours. Or if you read their book and you liked what you read, or you had a question, even better, like, and wanted to sort of discuss it with them, go to their office hours and discuss it. I think they'd be delighted. And then you'll also have corollary opportunities to do that. Summer internships or summer jobs. Bosses that you work well with can be mentors you collect over time. Research projects, if you're sort of a research intern somewhere on campus at some point, you could get a mentorship relationship there. Even upperclassmen that you somehow derive benefit from, sort of like the RA or whatever. Not every RA is going to be a mentor to you, but maybe you find one who is. So I think be genuine, but be open. They could be sort of hiding in plain sight anywhere.
Hi, it's Nicholas again. So I've really resonated with the comments about making stories, finding things and such. But I think the bad stories are stories that don't go according to plan. They say the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. So what are some instances where things have gone awry in your careers and your lives that actually directed you into what ultimately became your calling? And I'll also, with respect to my previous thing to Amy, I knew Alex before when he was in New York, so I wanted context. So he's a really interesting person. So just a small little detail. I would have talked to you about this if you'd been in person, but I just wanted to make that offering. All right, cool. Yeah, plans that have gone awry. Thank you.
I would love to share mine because an immediate story came to mind for a plan that has gone awry. So like I said, I was just taking classes I liked. Junior year, I was like, I think I'm an American Studies major because it has 4 fewer credits than CASA and I got to get out of here someday. And senior year, everyone was, like all of my friends were doing consulting, interviews and all these things. And I decided to do that. I was like, I've got to figure out how to do a case study and a problem set. And I started lining up my interviews, and I would see people in Tressiter like meeting and doing mock case studies. And I was like, why are they doing that? Like, can't they just like figure it out when they get there? It was not for me, but I didn't know. So I had an interview. I don't know how, scammed an interview at BCG and at Disney, because Disney has a consulting side. My BCG interview was first. And it was a full disaster. Like, I didn't know what a case study was. So I went in and I was like, oh, this is what they're all practicing. So it was really bad. And then I left and I got into a group with some friends and I was like, let's practice together. And I realized that there was a way to learn how to do a case study, just like a standardized test. There's a way to learn it, right? And I just hadn't learned it. So after my BCG interview, I thought, oh, I'm stupid. And then I went and learned the way to do it. And I was like, okay. And I crammed for like a week, and then was my Disney interview. And the craziest thing was the interview was at the Stanford Hotel. I advanced to like the second round, and the interview was at the Stanford Hotel. And it happened to be the same weekend that the Dalai Lama was coming to campus. And so I show up at the Stanford Hotel, and there are all these security guards and a lot of monks in the lobby. And I was like, oh, the Dalai Lama is here. I go in for my interview and I was prepared. I knew what I was going to do. The guy asked me about why I was interested in consulting at Disney. And I started talking about all the Disney movies I loved and how I grew up watching Disney and how I love stories. And he said, sounds like you want to be a writer. And I was like, no, I want to be a consultant. And then he asked me the questions. I bombed that interview as well. And I was like, oh no, I'm terrible. And I walked out and I saw the Dalai Lama was leaving on his way to come to campus. And I walked out and I saw him and I said, it's the Dalai Lama. And he bowed at me like this and then went, and I was like, that's a sign. I don't know what the sign is, but I'm not supposed to be doing this. I know for a fact I am not. I was like, I like started to cry. I was crying from embarrassment at my interview because I had prepared so much and I thought I was going to do a good job, and I did a terrible job. But I was just like, this is not where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be at Stanford watching the Dalai Lama. Like, I should be doing things that are creative and squishy and not so exact. And I didn't know my path yet. I had no idea that I was going to be a writer. I just knew that I wasn't supposed to be a consultant. So that was something going super awry. And I hadn't planned to see the Dalai Lama that day, but then since I met him, I went to campus and went to his session. He did a huge meditation with the entire campus and talked about following your path and being quiet to listen to possibility and all these things. And I started doing that. And that's what eventually led me towards the path that I chose. So the summary being, if just because all your friends are doing it doesn't mean you should do it too.
I'm going to follow up because I do unfortunately have to drop a bit early after this, but going to Amy's theme, and I remember that the day of that visit very vividly. I think of failure in our lives as frequently being one of two things. One is the situation created the failure. Right, there was an external event that threw all of your carefully laid plans awry. And the second one was, I did everything I could, but I still fell short of the goal, right? And you're at a place where you're surrounded by people who are so beyond exceptional, they're actually literally Olympic gold medalists, what they do, even if they're not getting Olympic gold medals for whatever discipline they are. And regardless of which of the two it is, it will happen to you, because I don't know a single person it hasn't happened to. And it, especially I think Maddie and other people who are in law will understand, law is a very hierarchical a profession. Everything is ranked. All the schools are ranked, all the law firms are ranked, even like they're more prestigious corporate practices than others. And it's so funny because that was when I saw people truly defeated by failure, where they let one of these two things happen and then it happened to them, rather than take the lesson away that, okay, I'm going to learn something from this. I'm going to choose what I learned from it. You can take Amy's lesson, which is, I'm not meant to do this. Or you can take the lesson, which is very popular with venture capitalists on LinkedIn posts, which is, I'm just going to keep knocking on the door 95 times until I actually get there. Whichever lesson you take away, you get to choose to take that lesson away, and then just, you get to commit to that path. And I think that's where I think you make success out of the failure, no matter whether it happened to you or you were the cause of the failure. It's how you take it away. Are you going to pursue the path that you're on and just double down, or are you going to say, nope, I'm going to go and make left or right or U-turn on what I'm doing? And that's a personal decision. I can't write that playbook for you. I don't think anyone here can. But what you can't let that do, though, is immobilize you or paralyze you, because I've seen it happen quite a bit as well. And that's the part where there's real defeat, and that's actually a failure. And with that, I do have to check out, but I wish you all well, and please enjoy the sushi. I am particularly jealous of you there. Thank you for having me.
Hello, maybe it's time for us to go out in the lobby and enjoy the sushi. These 6 alumni were with us today because they are supporters of the Stanford Humanities Center, and in that role they also are supporters of yours. And so we are going to do this again at some point. As I said at the outset, this is an experiment. We thought, let's try to gather a small audience to help these give our undergraduates interested in the humanities chance to hear directly from alumni with different career perspectives. So I think this has gone really well. We will be in touch again. Please make sure we have your email address. We will be in touch again about the kinds of events like this that might be useful, how we could help you in the future. And this is this group that you're hearing from is about half of a larger group with whom we have a continuing relationship, and they will be back. So we hope we see you again. We know we will see them again. And I want to especially thank Amy, Maddie, Lisa, Jeff, Sarah, Mark for taking the time to be with us today, both in person and remotely. We look forward to the next time we can do it again.